Awesome.
So, welcome to Clergy and Collars Getting Coffee. Today, I am joined by the Reverend Laura Mariko Cheifetz. I'm going to butcher your whole name, who began serving and is serving as the Assistant Dean of Admissions, Vocation, and Student Life at Vanderbilt. You are ordained in the PCUSA, graduate of North Park University with your MBA, McCormick Theological Seminary with your M.Div, and Western Washington University with a Bachelor's of Arts in Sociology. You also have authored, co-authored, edited a zillion and a half books. And I am delighted to have you as my guest. And I met you, Laura, so welcome. You were my small group leader on the PCUSA, 2014 Mosaic
Yeah.
Peace Conference to Israel, Palestine. So, just some light diving in to the world.
Just a surface getting to know you.
Right. Now, was that your first? You guys had been there prior to taking all of us there, or no?
I had not. So there
Okay.
was a planning team that had been there and like vetted everything. But as a small group leader, I was just along for the ride to provide some leadership, but I didn't necessarily have like any expertise or background or anything. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a really, it was about 2 weeks. It was very I don't know. I mean, it was mind-blowing. I'd heard from people who'd been before, and of course, like we had reading lists
Mhm.
prior to
Yeah.
going that gave perspectives different from I would say our news media outlet tends to give. Got like a broader experience. A lot of the stuff reading from Palestinian Christians' perspectives. Um, and so I know how it was for me. What was that experience like for you? And I'll preface this with saying, considering your background is multi-faith, multi-racial, multi lots of things. So I'll invite you to answer that.
Thank you. I was like, oh, I didn't really have any background or expertise. That's not totally true. Because my dad's family, that side of the family is Jewish. They have a tendency to be not super religious and also definitely not Zionist. So I kind of grew up in that thinking, even though I grew up Christian, but I knew that about my family. And then starting in like 2001, 2002, I was fairly active in a group that was protesting the occupation of Palestine, a group of Jewish identified people who, or were like Jewish adjacent people, protesting the occupation, the ongoing occupation. So, and then I served for the denomination on the Middle East Monitoring Group, which was like kind of looking at some of the situation that was happening and coming out with a particular resource that would aid congregations and working through some conversations around this. And so I had done a lot of reading, a lot of research, interacting with folks who had different kinds of stakes in it, I
Uh-huh.
suppose. And
Yeah.
so in some ways, it was kind of nice because I come at it from 100% like American, United Statesian
Right.
approach to it with a background, like my family background is very, very human rights focused. It's not just me, it's like generations back.
Yeah.
And so, because of that, and because of respect for religious diversity within my family, I feel like I came at it knowing I was going to learn a ton. I just didn't know what it would be. And that it was like
Yeah.
filling in or putting bodies to all of the narratives that I already had in my head. And so that was actually super helpful for me to be like, oh, here's the real lived experience of all of these different kinds of people. Cause
Uh-huh.
that's what was great about the trip is that we're talking to a lot of different kinds of people. Um, and so in that way, I felt like, okay, I'm prepared over here. And then, of course, it was like there were things in the trip that were super enraging or really like really got me. And so I felt like I was still really engaged in it alongside all of you who were in my small group. Like, I think we had a really great small group, to
Yeah,
be
we did.
honest.
Yeah.
And so that also, I think, helped. some of the conversations in my own engagement in it. But I was also like, I did have a moment at the wall when we were there and we were praying, and I was like,
Yeah. Yeah.
just
Yeah,
like,
it's a holy spot. And
yeah,
exactly.
and yet I'm like, this is why my family suffered for generations. Not this, but like the world's reaction to this. Yeah, it was a
Yeah.
lot.
I mean, it is a lot to process. Now you kind of you are steeped, I don't know, intentionally, unintentionally, if it's because, you know, you can't help. You're born into the people you're born into, right? Like you were born into a back, like you said, activist, humanist from way back, people coming from different places and stuff. So it was your upbringing in that regard was already diverse, but you intentionally continue to cultivate spaces of diversity. And there is always struggle in that, right? So how do you prevent that, or do you just go with it when it happens, that like wall hitting or that exhaustion or that part that comes for when you maybe you thought, I thought I'd already dealt with this, and then it just comes out of nowhere.
Yeah, I mean, I still definitely have my moment where like, I'm gonna go home. This is how I can tell that me and my spouse are like still meant to be together, because we're still that total like relief, you know, just like I just be myself. And growing up, my family was that way too. Like we were normal because I'm biracial. We're normal to ourselves. Don't really know what's up with all y'all. Like you seem to have a problem with it, but we're fine.
We're fine.
Yeah, as a part of a biracial family, you totally get that.
Yeah,
but I think because of that background, I kind of attribute my stamina for things like this to having that background, and that my parents were not, they didn't show that they were afraid of it. Like they would talk us through things. They were aware that racism is a thing because they'd already experienced some of that. And like when they wanted to get married, they got a lot of pushback. And then obviously they're not ignorant. And so they knew about racism and all of that, and about anti-Semitism. And my mom's family's also like, there's a lot of Buddhists on that side too. And so I think because of that, I'm just kind of fluent in having these conversations. And because I did so much personal work and professional work on anti-racism in particular, but of course that dovetails with all the other isms, I just like, I have an appetite for it, but I also have a capacity for it that maybe is like not totally normal. At some point I was like, maybe I feel like some people are just like really not good at this. And I would say a lot of white people are definitely not socialized.
Yeah, not socialized that way. Yeah.
Yeah. Like there's no stamina there.
Right. It's new muscles. Like I remember, so like I was you know, I was not like an athlete. I was not one of these like moms who like got her mom body post children. Like this is actually the best I probably ever looked.
You're like, I'm amazing. Look at what this body did.
So I remember I had a friend who gave me, he was a personal trainer, and I officiated the wedding. And I said, anyway, there was a time where I got like a training session. And what I had to say to him is I was like, okay, I know I seem strong. Part of that is like, I'm not built small, right? And I'm really competitive. So sometimes I'll just pretend like I'm stronger than I am. But I was like, I just need you to know, I'm not like one of these like middle-aged people who was formerly an athlete and is like trying to get back to their former shape. Like I've never been in shape. So like my muscle memories don't exist, right? I don't have those. These are they're first time memories. And the thing about that, the reason that you made me just think of that is like, I think sometimes that's something when you're steeped in it, you forget like, these are not muscles. Like this stamina, as you said, are new. They're brand new.
Yeah.
For a whole slew of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you're like a personal trainer of anti-racism. You and Jess, you're like, you could market that. Like for sure.
Oh my gosh, that's my next side gig. You could do it.
You can do it.
Yeah.
But I do think there's something like, so would you say that would be a benefit to why we actually should start these conversations earlier rather than later? Like people are like,
Yeah.
no, you have to save that for graduate school, right? Like
I know. Something that hardly anyone does. Right.
very
Um,
small.
right.
Right.
Very privileged portion of the population. Yeah, because kids so early, I mean, it's like so young, maybe
Oh
at
yeah.
first few months, they're already kind of picking up what the codes are. So like, this is what I should be reacting to.
Right.
And because a lot of people are not very good with handling difference, and I would say mostly white people, although some people of color love to participate in our own oppression, but like just not having the fluency,
Yeah.
then communicate to kids that like things are supposed to be awkward, or we're just not supposed to talk about something that everybody can see.
Right.
And so if you never have practiced that, or never are brave with your own kids or in your own relationships to even like practice listening to how other people talk about it in ways that seem anti-oppression,
Mm.
because obviously we're always hearing the other messages. And I think that's what some people think that they're exempting themselves from the conversation. That's not correct. The conversation is ongoing. It's how you decide to be an active or a passive participant, and on what side you decide to find yourself.
I mean, those are good skill sets to have.
So many things
Yeah. I was
in
gonna say
life.
like across the board. But
Yeah.
something I like, something that I would say our trip to Israel highlighted for me, or affirmed for me again, and conversations and everything's I had, and even you with talking about, like we just mentioned, like this elite group of people go on to get their masters, and all of that is like, so much of the people, United States people, they don't even own passports, right? It's like less than 40% or
Right.
something.
Yeah.
Um, don't even own a passport. So, and then our places, our pockets where we live can be very mono, whatever the mono is,
Right.
right? Like
Right.
very not diverse in a many ways, not diverse.
Hmm.
And and so then the only way you get exposed to, I'll say, diversity or even world stuff is things like the Olympics. So it becomes hard to have these conversations because it looks like you watch the parade of the Olympics world flags.
It's the best.
I love it. I love it. But there are countries that have flags that you're like, but they don't have autonomy. They're not
Yeah.
actually sovereign nations,
Right.
right? So
Right.
I absolutely love it. The only thing I don't like is that oftentimes our uniforms are made in China, which it feels like that's the one time maybe we
So
don't do
funny. Sorry, that's funny. Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But like, you get this like, it's this beautiful thing, and yet it's also this false narrative at the same time of like, then the countries are equal, or that they're individual. But like Puerto Rico, for example, not a sovereign nation, right?
Mhm, mhm.
Walks under their own flag,
Yeah.
rightfully so, at the Olympics. I love it. But if someone is unaware, and I don't know how you were taught about the U.S. territories, but I don't feel like I was in
Mhm. Yeah.
in school. Um, and so how do you, when you're doing these courses or you're having these classes, and you as student life, man, you're working through with students who are just maybe starting the
Mhm.
deconstruction, reconstruction process. Like, how do you balance all of that and the person who's in front of you?
Mhm. Yeah. I think it's kind of complicated sometimes, because I'm aware that just because I have this particular subset of knowledge, and like a lot of knowledge about certain things, there are people who know completely other things super well that I
Oh,
don't even really know exist, or like I might know, but I don't know it. And that I always have to remember that like all of us know different things, and all of us know different things, right?
right.
Like how we've experienced things. And I would say that in my growing up, and then as I became an adult, there was a lot of continuing reframing of what I knew, or continuing like reflection on what I know, which divinity school people are kind of set up to do that. They're like
Correct.
in to continually examine what they know and then relearn and reshape, which I think is a great setup for folks to really begin to engage in a lot of this diversity. But I'm always aware that I want people to continue to feel valued, and both in what happens when you're learning about stuff in divinity school. As you know, that can be very destabilizing,
Yeah.
because you're like, oh, I thought I knew the Bible, or I thought I knew theology. And then
And I
you are
don't.
exposed to, right, this like other set of, and you're like, oh, wait a minute, this has bearing on not only what I believe or what I teach, but has bearing sometimes on how I perceive myself. And so I kind of think of that formation hand in hand with like how we're always growing in our racial identities
Yeah.
as well, and in our religious identities. That I always want people to be like, I am loved and I am beloved.
Yes. Yes.
In the midst of knowing all of these things and being accountable sometimes for things too. Yeah.
Right. And I will say, yeah, as an M.Div student who took womanist theology from Dr. Towns at Union,
Nice.
yeah, there were many. I was like, oh, she must have done that with me 1,000 times over. With it, just remember, this child is beloved. You are loved, and let me help you to do this better. Like it was
Luckily,
such
that's
a
her
hard.
being. Yeah, that is her being, which is great. But yeah.
Yeah, that's a hard process. But so a lot of like since because like we don't live in the same states or any of that stuff, but and we have lots of friends who overlap as well. I mean, this is when you realize that the church is huge and tiny all at the same time. Um but you know, I get to watch a lot of things of what you post online of your life. And one trip of yours that you took, pre-COVID, so a while ago now. Um, and as you talked about reframing, I thought, wow, you had to do a lot of reframing, I feel like probably during that trip, was when you went to the Japanese concentration camps.
Mhm.
I mean, would you mind speaking about that? Because I know it seems life altering.
Yeah. Yes. I think you were right on that. I think it was 2018. I'm pretty
Okay.
sure that we did that. And so this was, and my mother's family, my mother's Japanese American side, and her dad was put in the Japanese American concentration camp in Arizona. It was on Native American territory that was in Poston, Arizona. Um, and then my grandmother's family, they were put into the camp in Topaz, Utah. And because it was her side of the family, there's still living relatives who were like mobile, and wanted to lead us to go together as a family to that particular site. That's a side of my family. It's like hyper politically engaged,
Mm-hmm.
and have always been, in part because of this experience they had when they were children. So because it was nice to go there with all my family, even though like family stuff is always, oh, it's always there. But
Yes, it
I had a lot of fun because I don't know, like I mesh really well with those cousins, and a couple of cousins, like we were missing a lot of cousins, but some of them came, and that was delightful. But to actually go to the site and think about, because my great uncle, when he was there, he was like a kid. I think he was like 7 to 10 maybe. And so his experience, he was like, I was a kid. Like I played, and he's very aware, like I played, and I made friends. And your grandmother, because my grandmother, when she was there, was like 14 to 17, maybe. He was like, I think it was really different for your grandmother. Like he's very cognizant of that.
Yeah.
But being able to see like the landscape and even stand on the threshold, I think I posted this.
Mm-hmm.
I stood on the threshold of the barrack door where my grandmother would have like left the barrack every morning, and looked at what she saw. And I was like, I cannot believe, I mean, I knew it, but I didn't know it.
Right.
like the kinds of things that our ancestors had to endure and had to integrate who they were. I mean, honestly, it did explain a lot about some of my grandmother's, like kind of how she operated, but also
Which is a gift to get that
yeah,
explanation too. Yeah.
true. I was like, no wonder she was so like pragmatic.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and that like for some family members, it's clear that that kind of broke them, and it didn't break her in the ways that it broke some other family members. But I also, whenever I feel kind of whiny, I'm like, how dare you? Your grandmother woke up in a concentration camp as an adolescent girl, which had to be terrible in a
Terrible.
lot of ways.
I mean,
3
puberty
years of her
sucks
life.
anyway, right?
Right. Yes. Correct. Right. Yeah.
And then to have to do puberty in a concentration camp.
Yeah.
And I know I couldn't imagine. Well, I couldn't imagine a concentration camp. And it's interesting too, because the language we use, like you use concentration camps, right? But that was not the word used in my history book.
Oh, same. Yeah.
Of,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Outside of Nazi Germany. That was a concentration camp.
Mhm.
We didn't have concentration camps. We had, I don't know what they called them.
They called it internment camps.
Internments.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Internments. And then I feel like the only like, and it was like this paragraph, right? It was just like a paragraph in
In most of the books, yeah.
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 And you're like, but you just mentioned, no, it's a 3-year paragraph in their lives, right? That's
Mhm.
that's not a paragraph. That's 3 developmental formative years,
Mhm.
not to mention what's not mentioned in that, you know, in
Right.
in making it a paragraph is that these were people who had businesses, jobs, home, and all of it just
Mhm.
taken, right?
Yeah.
So, what I mean, the part that you wouldn't have known about that, because I remember watching it, is one of the things that you I don't know if you talked to, you must have mentioned it, or I got very fascinated, and so I went to go research. Who know? I don't know which way it happened, but they're using like to do the archaeological sort of research on those concentration camps, right? So they're using these X-ray machines, sort of, that go and can see into the ground. So even though it's been leveled out, and it looks like there was nothing there, like there are these specific types of drone like X-ray machines, I forget what they call it, that use light. And do you know what I'm talking about? And so you can
No, this is cool.
so yeah, so you can like see the footprints of where those things are, even though it's been tried to be whitewashed over, as we'll say,
Mhm.
right? And I must have been really engaged in it, because I ended up using that as an example, not your family, but like this as an example in a sermon, to talk about how like those scars in genealogy, and like as much as we try to just like pave over it, um, it never actually goes, right? Those things don't go away. The ground, the earth, the soil, it tells stories.
Mhm.
Um, and so much as we try to pretend like it doesn't, it does. So even if the last remaining person is gone, the nature is still
Ground
bearing
still.
that story. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that landscape in Utah, because of the nature of the soil, is like really hard to grow anything there. So it's remarkable that anyone has ever farmed there, but that's what was happening. But you can still see, like with your bare eyes, the outline. Like it's just like it happened and it will never go away because of the nature of the soil there. And
Soil.
I think there must, I mean, assuming in other areas that they actually have tried to eliminate it, but you can still then, using these machines that you say, see where the disturbances were.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's very, you know, it's very interesting that also someone might find that fascinating, but then they don't really want to talk about the human impact of that scarring, maybe,
Mhm.
and what that would mean, and how, you know, you might think you're past it or whatever, because some people got reparations. I don't know how any of that worked, right? I feel like I only learned about that in a Seventh Heaven episode. Like, I don't think I
Mhm.
actually learned about it in reality. Like, I really think so, pop culture.
Yeah. Yeah, there was a redress movement in the 70s and 80s where people wanted to talk about it. And so it was like the people who wanted to talk about the survivors and then their kids usually helping them and
Mm,
really pressing the issue because at that point, I mean, we had lawyers before, but then there's like a lot more lawyers and people like psychiatrists and psychologists and all of this in the
right.
community. And so for that reason, Japanese Americans have historically always supported reparations. And so we support reparations actively for other groups of people, particularly Black Americans and Native Americans as well, because like, duh, like we know the impact on us because it was at a very specific point in time. And so for good or for ill, we're able to do research based on a very small population,
Right.
120,000 people and all their descendants, if you call that small, but on like a population through time based on specific events. But because this is stuff that keeps happening in society to groups of people, we can use those learnings and like the science that they're now doing with people who survive boarding schools and Native American boarding schools and
Oh,
their
okay. Yeah.
descendants, like we're able to find out a lot of information on what trauma looks like, racial trauma specifically. Um, and of course, there's like tons of research on that in other communities as well. But I feel like this is actually significant for all of us, right? For
Right.
humanity. How can we take these experiences and consider how we can learn about them and learn from them for everyone's benefit?
And then like, because I feel like I'm always going to get asked this question as a clergy. Somebody's going to go, where's the proof of that in the text, right? Where's the proof of that in the Bible? So I'm sure you've been asked that question. So what are some of those places that you draw on? Because I mean, absolutely everything you're describing to me feels like it's guided by God's hand. That could be because I'm like, yes, please continue to do that work, and like whatever. It could be because I affirm it, so of course I want to say it's from God. But like, where do you lean into the scriptures or other writings to tie that to people so that they recognize it's relevant for their work as it's always been relevant?
There are particular prophets
Mm,
in the Hebrew Bible that I think really are keyed into how distinct groups of people have messed up and the impact of that messing up. And so there's a part of me that really loves a lot of that tradition
mm,
because they're specific. Like they talk about here are the things, and they talk about how you get out of it. And so for some parts of the Hebrew Bible, it's like Jubilee, like forgiving debts and all of that because of specific types of economic bondage that people found themselves in because they were exploited.
mm-hmm.
And so some of it to me is that like we exploit entire peoples and clearly there should be some kind of making up for that.
Mm-hmm.
But that it's also very clear that God's not cool with some of the stuff that humanity does. So
No.
maybe don't do that anymore and maybe make it right. And so that's kind of where I think I draw a lot of that from, but I also draw it from like, I mean, Jesus went through that whole thing. You know what I mean? That whole ministry, that
Yeah,
whole like persecution, being
the whole thing.
executed, came back
Yeah.
to life. And if we're still going to operate in this way that is so dehumanizing to so many people, then what did he even do that for? Like you clearly didn't even internalize it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually a question I ask people sometimes, like when they're like, and then I'm like, then what was the point? What
Mhm.
was the point? If everything stayed the same, then there's no power in the resurrection. If everything that not for me, not the way I've read any of the stuff or studying, that there has to be a change that comes
Yeah.
in that moment, or else Jesus is just a really cool guy who did some awesome stuff.
Right.
And
Right.
I think Jesus is
Exactly.
more than that, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And I think like how I take it seriously and how I hear you taking it seriously is like, we cannot anymore, actually.
Right.
Cut it out.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the older I get, the more like my mom I feel like I have become in terms of like my mom
100%.
used my
Same.
mom my mom used to always say the phrase, like one of her favorite phrases when you know you had utterly disappointed this woman.
Oh no.
Right. Was or and it didn't have to be us. Like she would use it for all people. It was fair game.
Oh,
But the phrase like that is unacceptable behavior. Like, right? And it was always with the same tone, same whatever. But like
man.
it somehow just like cut. And I remember her and that was a free for all. Like I remember once as a young adult, I had to be in my early 20s, Laura, and we were somewhere and there was a truck in front of us, with like that call number, if there's a problem with our employees, like call them. I don't even know if they have those anymore, but it was still on this truck. And the workers were on a break and that's fine. And we happened to be behind them and we were leaving the same place. And they didn't throw their trash away.
Oh.
And
Uh,
my mom's like, that
no.
is unacceptable behavior. And when she went over there and told them, this is a group of like grown working men. My
Oh
mom is
man.
like, that is unacceptable behavior. And they're like, what do you want us to do? And she's like, just pick it up.
Pick it
Just
up.
pick it up and throw it away. And they're like, nah. And now they don't want to because my mom's, of course, telling them to. So what did she do? She got out her phone. She called the number right in front of them. And she's like, I'm filing a report.
Oh,
I've
she's my
entered
hero.
It's like here's the thing, and of course they're like, what do you want us to write down? It was unacceptable behavior. They littered and they didn't pick it back up. and, and there's so often now that I feel like I hear something in the news or I hear something that somebody's done or
And you're like, oh, that is unacceptable.
unacceptable behavior.
Yep.
Right? And there are things and I don't know, like I don't know that this gives comfort to me, but sometimes it can get really exhausting, the getting, and you talked about stamina, and I mean, I think, yeah, you definitely have it. And some of us are really still trying to build it. But there are times where I'm like, I just want the world to stop for a second because I'm exhausted trying to like saying that's unacceptable, that's unacceptable, that's unacceptable. And so what do you do when you've reached those moments in your life? Now, you talked about having the perfect partner in Jess who just allows you to come home and shut off, right?
Yeah.
But in addition to that, and having a great partner like that, what do you do to, I guess, to re-energize or to properly rest so that you can continue to do the work that you do?
Um, I do not actually keep up on all the things that I care about, in part because that's like very doom scrolly behavior for me.
Yeah.
And I'm aware of that. So I kind of take what I can absorb, and then at a certain point, well, we're very social people. So part of
Yeah.
it is that like we always have something planned. And if we don't, I'm like, let's fill the night with something. Talking with someone or reaching out to hang out with someone. So some of it is just like having a really solid community, whatever that looks like. That has always worked for both me and Jess. And sometimes we do things like even just listening to a really good podcast or going to a live recording of a podcast where you're like, look at all the good stuff that people are doing.
That is,
Or
you're
going
speaking
out to
my
like,
nerd language for real.
yes, I mean, that
Yeah.
could be really helpful. Or like going to hear live music really helps. And you can do it for not too much money every night of the week in Nashville. And so I feel like location actually has helped a lot. But when we lived in Georgia, for instance, and even in Chicago, we could just like go out to our neighbors and hang out and talk with them and feel a little bit better about the world. And I do like to hang out. There are a couple of community organizations we like to hang out with, and engaging with community people is like, you know what? It's great, because we're not alone.
Yeah.
And there are all these people working their asses off, and we
Yeah.
may not always be able to engage in the way that we want, but we know really good people are doing really good work at a hyper local level.
Right.
And that I feel like really helps.
Yeah, I mean that's powerful. And then now it's a little bit of a pivot, but you guys just went through a personal, well, I imagine you're actually still going through it. But you talked about that even at that time. Your house caught on fire. You lost your house. You lost your dogs, who are your family. Uh, and then that whole process. But as you continue to update everyone on that process, highlighting the community and the amount of support and love you had seemed, I mean, seemed like it was a very healing, intentionally healing part of the process.
Yeah, I think because both of us are kind of external processors to a certain extent. And I mean, I think we always knew we had good people in our corner, in part because we make choices about like who to be in contact with, you
Right.
know, and because both of us kind of know a lot of people through different avenues in our lives, and again the extrovert thing, but I am not super clear that we anticipated having so many people. I mean, I have people like we all have people calling us immediately,
Right.
even as I'm like talking to my parents on the phone, you know, and there are families, all of them were just like super supportive, so that helps already to have super
Right.
supportive family. But then to know that like there are random neighbors we'd never talked to, and they're like, this happened to us last year and we have a truck, if you ever need to borrow our truck, here's our number. So I think some of it too is just like when you're able to pay attention, which trauma can really mess you up, witness. And it can be a while before you can like really absorb it.
Mm-hmm.
But to even show up and do little things, like we don't even know who it was that brought over tissues and bottles of water. I
Right.
mean, she just like gave it to us and walked away. That being the person who does that, that was like such a gift. And I feel like for some people, they might think like, oh, that one text I sent, or like the $10 I sent, or whatever is too little. And nothing is too little.
Right.
And I think that's part of what's kind of complicated now about being in this society, is that we can feel like um, something is too little. And
Yeah.
I think what we found is that nothing was too little. Like people will be like, I never said anything to you at the time, but I wanted to know I was praying for you. Like that's huge actually
Mm-hmm.
for us. And so for me to always remind myself, because I'm very much, I'll beat myself up any day of the week
Yeah.
about not doing something for someone, or not showing up, or just being too distracted.
Mm.
But my own observation of how I reacted to people who I think maybe didn't feel like they were like present enough, I was like, oh no, you guys were great.
You were great.
You were
Yeah.
great. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because that's, I mean, I mean, obviously you all learned a lot. You learned a lot about insurance and a lot about, I mean, and processing. I mean, there were so many levels of grief that took place in that, right? It wasn't, just one. It was multi-layered. But like, what would be the advice you would give? I mean, obviously you're saying whatever you do is going to be enough, like for other people during that time. But what is something like going forward, as you guys have gotten a new house, as you moving forward or trying and attempting to like rebuild things, is there anything that you'd go, we are definitely going to do this going into the future? Like,
Mhm.
was there any great learning in that?
That's a good question. I'm gonna have to think about that a little bit. I mean, I think some of it is like for us to remember to even think of other people when stuff happens, or like send them a follow-up text 2 weeks, whatever it is.
Whatever it is.
Just
Yeah.
importance of us doing that for other folks. I'm very like fire safety conscious. So the irony really of like this electrical thing that none of us had control over or
Well,
knowledge
and,
of.
and you didn't,
Um,
like, that's so, it's so random, right?
right, right. And that can happen at any point. Some of the stuff we'd done before did help. So like we had already had a fire safe pouch for all of our documents.
Right.
And I tend to keep like all of our important documents in one place. Ultimately, that was really helpful. And I also have a plastic bin fetish, may I tell you. So all of when we're not using stuff, it's like generally closed away. And that really helped. Like we saved a lot of summer clothes that were packed away in plastic bins because they didn't take as long to get like the smell out of.
Right.
So I will say that like tighten up your storage stuff and that will help. But I think maybe being okay with accepting help was probably the biggest thing that I'm surprised I was able to do.
Yeah, that's
generally, I'm just like, no, it's fine. And I had to be
right.
like, thank you.
Right. And I think that's what a huge thing to learn about yourself too, because I think it can be really easy to get into a mindset of always being the helper and never being the helpee, but in truth in life we are all those things simultaneously all the time. But yeah, it can be really hard to ask for help. So I'm glad that you guys were able to do that. How do you still feel like you're trying to find solid ground, or do you feel like you hit a different, because grief or processing trauma and resiliency, they come in stages. So do you feel like you're standing on more solid ground now, or is it still kind of mushy?
I feel like for me, I feel more solid.
Yeah.
But I'm always looking out for the sneak attack of feelings. And I do still have a therapist.
Yeah, well, good.
Yeah. So I'm aware of that. I think we still talk about stuff, like even just this morning, Jess was like, oh man, remember we could have pulled out those window locks because metal is the easiest to clean. And we had like these extra window locks. We're like, damn it. So, I mean, I think that's the part that's a little bit challenging is like,
you all learned a lot about cleaning.
Yeah.
And what can't be cleaned in that process. Like, and I mean, in all your little video, because for people who don't know Laura and Jess from and weren't watching those things, you guys kept giving updates to the online social community about sort of the process of, buy new socks. Just recognize that they're not going to get clean, right? Just not going to get that smell out of them. You're just gonna have to redo the collection. But then there are some things like that, like the fire department people and whatever are just like, that's just it. And then also realizing what are some of the priorities, like your book collections and kitchen supplies and things that give you joy, and like what kind of has to get replaced first in order to stabilize, but also what insurance considers important. You're like, no, my books are really important. Actually,
I know that poor dude was in shock after I told him the number of books. Yeah.
I mean, and the bulk of your collection isn't even at home, right? You were saying, thank goodness it was at work.
Yeah, like all the church stuff. Yeah, and the Asian American stuff mostly at work. But then it's like, all of that white nationalism and other people of color stuff we had to decide what to replace. And
and go through it. And now, like when incidents happen like what just happened in Hawaii with the wildfires or Canada or whatever, I mean, that has, your tragedy has got to given you a different lens or I don't know, sympathy, empathy for the people and what that really means. That you've always been empathetic, but how did that switch that for you?
I think I would say I probably felt it a little bit differently, and just thinking like, that's the worst smell when plastic has burned. Like, because I think that's actually what makes a lot, like building materials and plastic, when all of that burns, it's a very distinct and really terrible smell. And I was just thinking like people going back, especially to where basically everything was wiped out. And that's the only smell for miles around. That part I can't imagine. Because like we could go into the house, get some stuff and come outside. And other people, that's the whole neighborhood.
Wow.
And I'm
Yeah.
just like, that's got to be so hard for folks.
Because doesn't come out, right? It takes time to get
Mhm. So
that
long.
smell.
Yeah.
Yeah. It, yeah, that I mean it's really quite impressive. And I mean the process that you guys went through, obviously that level of tragedy. You do have a dog now, another dog. So how is that
Mhm.
going?
She's been really good for us. I mean, obviously we rescued her and such,
Yeah.
but um she actually was like a really good dog for the time that we needed because she does let us snuggle her, which is and we've had more independent dogs in the past.
Okay.
So I would say this was definitely the right dog. She's also the easiest dog we've ever had. I
Which
mean, we're
God
at the
probably
vet
knew
like
you
every
needed.
other week because she's so delicate. But just in terms of like her exercise needs and all of that, very different, and grooming needs very different than other dogs. And that has really helped too, to not be like constantly preoccupied in that way,
Uh-huh.
and more like, there's this dog, she's pretty happy.
I mean, you guys
Yeah.
do take very good care
There
of
is that.
your
There's
dog.
that
Like,
double income, no kids thing. Yeah.
I mean, this is when, so I like dogs, and I know people going, no, you don't. No, I do like dogs. I like animals. This is what I know is I'm like, I am the aunt in
Mhm.
the pet world, right? Like, no, if you're
Yes.
going on vacation, you need someone to watch your pet. Your pet is fine. I don't like hate them. They can come around. I'm not allergic. I will have fun with them. But
Yeah.
at some point, they need to go back to their parents.
Yeah.
Like, at some point,
That's
we're
funny.
done. And so my
Yeah.
feeling is somebody like me just shouldn't own a pet if that's my mindset, right?
Mhm.
Nor should, if that's your mindset about children, should you be, maybe
No,
you
that's
should
true.
rethink
That's
having them.
true. Yep.
Um, but you know, it's just like we had, so my sons and my best friends from seminary actually sent a message to me. She's like, "Who are you?" Like it was so like, because we allowed our sons to get a gerbil, right? So they got a gerbil.
Okay.
They only
I
got one
mean, contained.
contained. Smelly as all get out, but
Yeah.
contained.
Ooh.
Uh, but their gerbil, whom they named Egg, escaped. And when we were on vacation, and ended up obviously dying, we did not find Egg in time. So then some time passed, and they wanted another one. But what we had learned in the time is that gerbils are communal, just like you
Oh,
talked about community, right?
yeah.
They actually like company. They like company.
Oh,
So
okay.
they're like, "Can we each get one?" Sure. At the pet store. Make sure they're the same gender. I want the same. They're like, "Yep, they are." No, they
Oh
weren't.
no. Oh no.
We at one point, until they were rehoused, had 18 gerbils.
No.
Yes.
That is wrong.
Unacceptable.
Unacceptable.
Right.
Oh my
And
God.
this is when you realize you love your children more than you hate some other things that you're
Yeah.
experiencing.
Look at you compromising so
Oh,
much of your lifestyle, your beliefs.
both of my husband and I were like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Because it was a lot. And then so we had to like donate that. We had to give them away. We had to take them back to the pet store. And I was like, this is some sort of scam you all got because you've
Yeah.
got all these free gerbils you're gonna sell.
Yeah. And
And
make
I've
money.
been like a gerbil farm. And they're like, you're donating them, thank you. And I was like, I don't want to donate them. I want
This
you to
is
pay
so
me.
horrifying. Let this be a lesson.
Yeah, but I mean, but you know, again, just like a lot of the conversation that we've been having, like our capacity to adapt, to accept new truths, to reframe the stories of our lives based on experience and also profound love,
Yeah.
it's you know, is quite, it's quite amazing that we are capable of doing that. it gives me hope and joy. And it sounds like you look for those things as well. I should also say I like that you seem to me to be, you and Jess, sometimes the resiliency is celebrating the ridiculousness of where you are. Is that accurate? Or
Absolutely. Because you're like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen.
and the only way to proceed is to just embrace it fully.
Yeah. Okay, here we go. Yeah.
And just roll with it. And I think that was no another clearer to me than I believe it was a uterus cake. Is that?
Oh, yes. When she had her hysterectomy, we decided, you know what? First of all, never use that thing. But second of all, maybe we should have a shower.
A shower. It was brilliant.
Yeah. And then I insisted on making the uterus cake. And I had just looked up a generic, and she was like, please don't. And so she sent me the recipe of the cake I should make. This all tracks, right? That she would be like, incorrect, should be a sponge. So then I made the most delicious sponge cake, and I figured out, the fallopian tubes and the ovaries.
Oh my gosh.
I figured it all out. And our friends were fantastic. One of them painted a little uterus. One of them drew a uterus and said adios.
It is so, I mean, it really was brilliant. And I thought, yes, because I do think in sometimes context of these things matter, right? Like, I had the similar procedure or whatever, but it was after I had my children. I knew I wanted kids. And so for me, I was like, hey, thank you. Thank you. You did a great job.
Good work.
Good work. Bon voyage, and that's a very different. And then she was like, no, this is nothing. I'm not using it in the way it was supposed to. We're done.
Yeah.
And yet, you realize there are women for whom that is not their story. And so they're not going to do that kind of stuff. But I think sometimes it shouldn't take away from other people doing that, right? You can recognize both things can exist in a world at the same time. And I just think you guys model that very well. And I was like, I saw those pictures of the cake and I was like, why didn't I do that? That was brilliant.
Yeah, she named her fibroids.
Oh,
they were hyper educated, and one of them definitely a white lady, who just showed up. Nobody wanted that. Because you have to. It's ridiculous. The whole thing is stupid.
Well, yes, and it also, like, I think sometimes another thing that this opened up, this learning more about this, because I'm a woman. I have these parts. I'm an educated woman. I did health education. Like, I'm knowledgeable about these sort of things. And then I realized, no, I'm still completely dumb.
There's so much.
We just
don't seem to know.
No, and then when we have these conversations that are so complex and you try to make them into, I'd raise my hand all of a sudden. When you try to make them into sound bites or snippets, or you try to take, that you're like, these are complex ideas. These are complex stories. And how do we, instead of trying to make a perfect soundbite out of it, wouldn't it be nice if we just allowed for all the sound bites, like to come in so that it can be a real conversation? Because I feel like so often we want easy answers and quick solutions, and yet that's fine for moments, right? Triage has its place, but it's not life-sustaining.
Yeah. And that so many people are forced to always live in that space.
Yes.
And I think, like, having occasionally had to live in that space, that's so not okay. Like, your body can't sustain that. Just that level of stress all the time. And I think that some of it too is like the biblical mandate
Yes.
No one should have to live in that space in perpetuity.
Yeah.
Yeah. People
Yeah.
deserve more.
Yeah, it's brilliant. So we are at the end of our like closing in on the time. One question that I have been asking at the end of these podcasts has been my Care Bear question, which is currently I go through seasons of favorite questions. They have varied. I still have several I go to. Like if you were to describe yourself as a spice, what would it be and why? I don't know. Like that's a question I like to ask people. I'm cardamom, like
Oh,
cinnamon, but with
nice.
a little kick.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, all sorts of questions. So this is my question, and this is my season of this question. Um, child of the 80s, early 80s cartoons. So Care Bears were a part of my growing and development. I have since come to have a different appreciation for them now, for lots of reasons. I think they're theologically a rich animation. Uh, so, my thought about them is if it is more about gifts and holy, spiritual gifts and what we project out into the world. Because of course, they were designed to what they projected was all like reconciliation, was all about healing, right?
Mhm.
It wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about they all bound together to heal with the gift that they had, including grumpiness, right? All the
Yeah.
gifts. And and they put it out into the world in order to make the world a better place, or their context a better place. So, Laura, if you were a Care Bear,
Mm.
what color Care Bear would you be? And what is the emblem on your belly? What's that core Laura symbol that you are shining out into God's world?
Mhm. The color would probably be red. Not only
Like
because it's my favorite color and I look good in it, but I think because like
you do.
very visible, I'm a very visible person, I would say, in a lot of ways, personality wise. I always remind people like I do get line jumped a lot. Like people, I'm invisible, just like my stature and race and like that part. But I think when I'm speaking, I
Yeah.
tend to get like my personality kind of takes over. So I'd say red for that. And the symbol, I mean, it would have to be food related
Okay.
because I do love to feed the people.
You
But
do.
also like I have a thing about everybody feeling welcomed
Mm,
and nourished. I
yeah.
would say that's my thing.
And is there a particular food that symbolizes that more so for you than others?
I always say for Asian Americans, like peeled and cut fruit is how we say I love you.
Hmm.
So it might have to be that.
So yeah, that's brilliant. I would love to see this just sliced orange. That's a
Yeah.
brilliant symbol. Um, but there is like so one of the things that I did to avoid doomsday scrolling during COVID, and also to be able to decompress, is I began to watch Korean dramas,
Mhm.
um, because I don't speak Korean.
Mhm. So you're like,
So
hey, I'm up for a challenge.
I mean, I
What's
watch.
happening here?
I actually have always watched this subtitles, shows, and movies. I've always been a watcher of, so that part isn't new. And I've watched others. It's not just Korean dramas, but that's one thing that I feel like has been prevalent throughout all the shows that I watched, like the asking somebody if they've eaten,
Yeah.
making sure they've eaten. It's like there's a lot of love. I was like, I didn't realize, and then like checking that with some of my friends who are Asian to be like, and they're like, oh no, that's accurate. That's an accurate.
True. Yeah. And I would say even that was like one of the things that crossed over for my family. That's also like a very Jewish thing. Like you gotta eat.
You got to eat.
Yeah.
I say I love you by filling up your stomach
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
food.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's great. That sounds like a marvelous Care Bear. And as you are a marvelous person, thank you for spending some of your time with us and for being a part of the show. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's always delightful to talk with you.
All right. Take care.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.